Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the regular March meeting of the Concord Zoning Board of Adjustment. We will follow our usual procedure this evening, which is to say we will take the cases in the order in which they appear in the agenda. We will ask the appellant to come forward, be sworn in,
He was one handling it,
and offer any testimony that he or she would like us to hear. Following that, we will ask the appellant to step down, and we will solicit testimony from anyone in the audience who wishes to be heard either in favor or in opposition to the appeal. Next, we will check in with Code Enforcement to see if there are any further comments from the Code Enforcement Office. And following that, if there has been any testimony that appears to justify factual clarification, the appellant will have the opportunity to offer that clarification, not new evidence, prior to our concluding the public testimony portion of the hearing. Under most circumstances, the board will act on each case before moving on to the next. We do request, if at all possible, that the appellants confine their presentation to 10 minutes, and that those who come to speak from the audience confine their presentation to 5 minutes. There is one item that I should mention tonight. First of all, there are two meetings this month. There's one today and one tomorrow. So you may, if you're here for a case and you're not sure which agenda it's on, you might want to check tonight's agenda and make sure that it is on tonight's agenda. Cases tonight are 422, 1122, 1222, 822, and that's it. One of the cases, 422, has been withdrawn. We will be continuing that case till next month. That will be the April meeting. So if you're here for that case, you need not stay. That's 10 Ferry Street OCP, Opportunity Corridor Performance District. That will not be heard this evening. The first case that we will hear this evening is case 1020, Christopher Aslan and Rachel Goldwasser. A request for a one-year extension has been requested for an extension of 1 year to complete a project at 17 Rockland Road in accordance with Article 28.9.3, Decisions by the Zoning Board of Adjustment, Section C, Variances, Subsection 6, Expiration of a Variance. The property was granted a variance on March 4th, 2020, to Article 28.4.1H, Table of Dimensional Regulations, to allow the removal of an existing garage to be replaced with a new garage, and to allow a 3-foot 8-inch setback from the easterly property line where a 15-foot setback was required at 15 Rockland Road in an RS, a residential single-family district. You swear to tell the truth?
I do.
Would you identify yourself for the record, please?
Yes, sir. I'm Chris Aslan from 17 Rockland Road.
And Mr. Chairman, just before we begin, I just want to reveal that I know both of the applicants professionally, but not personally, and I don't think I have a conflict, but I just wanted to put that on the record.
Very good.
And while we're at it, I also have a professional relationship with the applicant, but I don't think it interferes with my ability to deal with the case.
Very good. In this town, if we couldn't hear any cases from anyone that we knew something about, it would be an empty room.
Yes.
Mr. Aslan.
Yes, thank you. I think this is a fairly self-explanatory request. Back up a little. Due to COVID-19 restrictions, we were scheduled to start construction in May of 2020. Obviously, the state of emergency went into place, and we were unable to get started. And then, for a number of reasons, our contractor had delays and shortages, and we weren't able to get started in the next summer either. But we are now up on the schedule for this fall, and but need an extension of 1 year to allow us to start the project under the variance.
Very good. Any questions?
You haven't adjusted the plans in any way from the original submissions?
No.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone who wishes to be heard either in favor or in opposition to this appeal? Any comments from Code Enforcement?
Oh, sure.
That will declare the public hearing closed. I'll invite the board to consider the case. Perhaps someone would care to make a motion?
Yeah, it's a reasonable request, and we've done these in the past, so I'm going to move approval.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Is there any discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The vote is unanimous. The variance is extended. Next case this evening is 3234. This is case 1122, 3234 South Main Street and 33 South State Street, CBP Central Business Performance District. Property owner is the City of Concord, and the applicant is the John Flatley Company. The applicant proposes to demolish the existing building and build a multi-story residential complex with parking on the first level and is seeking variances, items 1 through 8, and a special exception. See case 1222. There is a case 1222 which is going to piggyback on the case that I'm calling out at the moment. First, they are requesting under Article 2845E5, development of attached and multifamily dwellings, to allow the first story of the building to be used for parking, which is an accessory use to the residential use and not an allowed principal non-residential use as required in the Central Business Performance District. Item 2, Article 28548A, CBP District Standards, multifamily dwellings, to allow a variance from the requirement for a non-residential use on the first story of a building and to allow parking on the first story, an accessory use which is otherwise permitted in the Central Business Performance District on or above the second floor. Article 28548C, parking lots and structures, in accordance with Article 28712A2, to allow a variance from the requirement for a non-residential use on the first story of a building to allow parking on the first story as an accessory use to a residential use on the second floor and above, which is an otherwise permitted use in CBP district, to locate a parking structure on the first story within 100 feet of South Main Street and South State Street. No, I didn't read the same item twice. Number 4, Article 28548G, building to lines, to allow a variance from the requirement that the front wall of the building will be located at the front lot line or street right-of-way line, and relief from requirement that any portion of the building height greater than 65 feet above street level from South Main Street be set back 10 feet from the property line. Now that, I believe, has been mooted, correct?
Yes.
Does that mean this whole item is mooted?
No, there's still a, let's see, the 20% feet of street frontage on the property, that provision's still.
Okay. And to allow a variance from paragraph 1 of this article to allow a variance from the provision that a public plaza occupy no more than 20% of the street frontage of a property, and further that the building be required to occupy 80% of the front property line. This building will occupy less than 80%. Article 28548I, ground floor occupancy and transparency along the South Main Street, to allow a variance from the requirement that there be a 60% transparent glazing of the occupancy of a building at ground level, and the requirement that there be a provision of at least 60% of the uses at street level be comprised of uses which include the sales of goods and provisions of services and entertainment. Article 287.8C2, this is item 6, access and driveway standards, circulation separation of driveways in non-residential districts, to allow the location of a driveway on South State Street located 120 feet from the intersection of South State Street and Fayette Street in the general location of an existing driveway where a distance of 200 feet is required, and further to allow the location of the existing same driveway closer than 200 feet from the other driveways on the same lot or on an adjacent lot. South State Street is a collector street, and to allow the driveway entrance on Fayette Street to be located closer than 200 feet from the intersections of Fayette and South Main Streets, which South Main being an arterial street, and Fayette and South State Street, a collector street. And Article 7, parking lot perimeter landscaping required, to allow paving to the property line where a landscaped area of 10 feet is required along a collector roads at South State Street. And finally, item 8, Article 2877F, driveway widths, to allow a driveway of 44.3 feet in width to provide entry to a parking lot, the parking garage in this case, on Fayette Street, where a maximum width of 28 feet is allowed. Mr. Damati, are you good to go?
Mr. Chairman, I think there's a special exception also.
Oh, well, I'll read that too while we're at it. That's the item 1222, 3234, South Main Street, and 33 South State Street, CBP Central Business Performance District. Property owner is the City of Concord. Applicant is John Flatley Company. Special exception from Article 28521, parking structures. In accordance with paragraph B, The applicant requests a special exception to not build a commercial parking structure for non-residential uses at the street level of a parking structure, but rather to construct a parking structure for residential parking. Gentlemen, may I swear you in? You swear to tell the truth?
I do. Yes, sir.
Would you identify yourselves for the record? And before you start, I will remind you that we have read all of your applications, so we are aware of all of the details of your presentation. So that means, for example, the history of the site, the history of the transactions, and the need for apartment housing in the city are things that have come to our attention. And so it would be probably most efficient to focus on the criteria for variances and the special exception as opposed to background information.
Most
you.
appreciated. Thank you. My name is Doug Richardson. I'm Vice President of Acquisitions and Planning for the John Flatley Company. I have with me tonight Raymond Diamante. He's a partner of Diamante, Corser, Pellerin and Associates. Lono Hunter, who is a project manager with the Dennis Myers for architecture. John Noonan with Fieldstone Land Consultants. He's a project manager. They're here for any technical questions this evening. And also Matt Walsh, City of Concord. As you said, you don't really want to get into the history of it, but we are looking at.
The sign-up sheet.
Sure. We are looking at 64 units of 1 and 2 bedroom in nature, along with 60 parking spaces. The proposal that's in front of you this evening is for the specific variances and for the project itself going forward. Our next steps will be the architectural design review and planning board if we're successful this evening, of which we're looking for a commencement of this project in 2022 this year.
And I'd like to introduce Lono Hunter as our architect for the project.
John Noonan, Fieldstone Land Consultants.
And gentlemen, if you want to take a seat up here, please do.
We've got another chair over here.
I don't mind.
Might as well get right into it, Ray.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't have to get into the history, so get right into the.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be before the zoning board on this project. I've looked at that building all my life. I'm very eager to be part of the team that ends its natural life. We have an awful lot of things before you in terms of requests this evening, but it's basically the nature of the property itself that brings us to this many requests for zoning board relief. I think a great place to start is topography. It's not the first time the ZBA has heard that topography has created hardships on a property, and this is probably the penultimate example of that happening. Everything here is based upon the elevation changes between South Main and South State, and also the connector road at Fayette and its grade changes. We know basically what the history of the ordinance is, a rather recent ordinance, but what its purpose was. And I think a good start would be for Lono to introduce the site to you and his architecture. So what you're looking at right now is what we hope to bring to this part of the community. And one of the important things we believe is that we're bringing residents to be in the downtown so that at 5 o'clock in the evening, they're going to be going out to restaurants and entertainment venues and everything else in the community and patronizing and supporting those businesses in the downtown area instead of being somewhere else. So it's part of trying to keep the lights on after 5, and that's what we're doing here. Lono, if you could describe what you've done there.
Sure, and as you know, this is, we've had a preliminary review with the ADR, and we'll be headed back next month for a formal review. So it's still a work in progress in terms of those approvals, but essentially what you're looking at is 5 stories of wood frame construction over a podium that separates a parking for the residents, with a storefront on South Main, surface treatments of brick at the lower level, and panel type, more modern facade above that with double hung windows. Some roof lines to accentuate the towers and sort of break it up and make it feel a little more residential. And then to the south of the building, on the remaining portion of the street front, we're creating a kind of park-like atmosphere with amenities for residents in terms of usable patio spaces. There's a pool that you can't see from the street, but there's a pool up there, up above the wall, and surface parking. And that's, there's a few balconies tucked away. We didn't want anything hanging out over the street. There's a few balconies tucked away within the towers for the residents. And that's essentially what you're looking at. You can see there what Ray was speaking to in terms of the topography. You can see the 2 overhead doors on the north elevation, lower left. And that picture tells the story pretty well in that it's, yeah, exactly. It's the challenge of getting a lower level that works with South Main and an upper level that works with with State Street, and then allowing for an access to get to the parking underneath all that while mitigating the existing grade is not simple. So that's just, we wrestled north, south, east, west, and that's essentially the one place we could get access to make that all work. Good, Ray?
Thank you, Lono. You can see, looking at that top elevation, you can already see the topo and what that topography does in terms of hardship and impacts. To enter at the Main Street level, that first floor is in the ground when you get to South State. And what you're seeing at South State on the right is part of the second floor. So that South State Street there's no access directly into that. You just don't get there from here. As you look at the various variances that are involved, there's several interesting aspects about the zoning. And one is, I guess, an intent, when possible, to have commercial on the first floor. And in this case, with that topography, if we put a commercial use on that first floor, we're just going to be ramming that first floor back into the hill and literally not having any access to the rest of that floor. So, among other things, that is not the program that we were trying to adapt here. I think it is helpful at this point for Matt to give us some history. And the city has been working on trying to do something in compliance with the ordinance for quite some time without any luck. And Matt, if you could just give us a rundown on what's been going on, that would be very helpful.
I can do that, and in respect to the chair's comments that you know the history on the site already, I will be very brief. Long story short, this was owned by the state of New Hampshire. They approached the city in 2011 and announced that they were divesting of the property. The city, under RSA 440, had a right of first refusal to acquire it. We entered into negotiations with the state in 2011, attempted to find a developer to essentially assign our right of first refusal to. That effort was not successful, even though we had multiple developers that we were talking with. Their projects were not economically viable. We ended up acquiring the property on Halloween of 2014. Since 2011, we have, after acquiring it in 2014, I should say, we did formally list it with a broker, the NIA Norwood Group of Bedford, New Hampshire. Since 2011, we've had 8 different developers with 17 different proposals that have come before the city. It's been challenging to find the right concept that can work with the property, that is economically viable, that is respectful of the city's master plan and its aspirations, that will help reinforce the vitality that we have in downtown. So the project that you have before you was approved by the city council in May of 2021. It was a unanimous vote, and I would note that the architecture is essentially identical to what you see on the screen here. Beyond that, I would also note that I sent the letter. I was rather late. I apologize for that, but you have a letter from me that goes through city administration's thoughts on each variance and the special exemption request, which I can get into once Ray presents those and goes forward. But that is the overview.
Thank you.
And that history establishes, I would say, a very substantial effort on behalf of the city administration to try to come up with a developer who, among other things, would do what the very first variance is about, retail on the first floor. And with that topo in that location, it's a very hard sell. It's more than a hard sell. Among other things, I think Matt would confirm that a few of the proposals wanted the city to put money into the development. Is that a correct statement?
All of the proposals wanted the city to put money into
I didn't quite want to say that. They all wanted money for this site to be developed. I can only follow that with one sentence. The John Flatley Company is not asking the city for any money. And that's because they build this kind of building. They have a program that is a proven successful program of developing this kind of property, and they're not asking the city for any money, TIF or otherwise, relative to this site. Now, was there a question? I'm sorry. So I think maybe a good way to do this is just kind of go through the various requests that are in front of us. And, Mr. Chairman, as you indicated, it sounds like you're repeating yourself as you go through a couple of these. And that's because the ordinance kind of repeats itself in the same vein. And we felt it was better to state it twice because it were different sections than to leave one out and then have to come back later for relief. So one of the very first things is that the first story of the building has to be utilized for retail use. Well, that's not what we're doing, and that's not what's feasible for this site under these circumstances. We feel strongly that parking is necessary for this use. It's not required. We could build this building and not provide any parking whatsoever. But what you're seeing right there, I'm not sure who's doing it, but I think maybe Mr. Creveling is doing that. You're looking at a parking garage, which is on the first floor. And we're providing parking underground for most of the parking, more of it on surface, and then some of it it's not 1 or 1.5 spaces per unit. But we feel that without parking, there's several things wrong with the project. Number one, it's not financeable. Can't build it. Can't get a loan for it. Lenders want to see something that has some convenience to it. Number two, among other things, to drop all of those people into the downtown area and then not provide parking means they're going to park downtown. And if they're parking downtown, they're using up parking that is pretty vital to the entertainment, retail, office, theater uses, and other uses in that area. The theme, really, of our project is keep the lights on after 5. To have people living there who are going to walk out their front door, maybe their side door, but go to a restaurant, do some shopping, go to the theater, whatever. Try to have some vibrance in the downtown area more than is there now. And the community is doing pretty good about getting some residents in the downtown area, but this site would be a really important additional feature. So in the first instance, where the first story is limited under the ordinance to commercial use, we're asking, number one, to make it parking. And we're making it not parking to support a commercial use, which is another element of the ordinance, but parking to support the residential use. So that's the nature of this first request. And you'll also notice that as you go down through, there's different numbers so of ordinance references. So the same issue kind of comes up again under 28.548A, multifamily dwellings. Well, they're not permitted on the first story. And by the way, we're not trying to put them on the first story. We're putting, by the way, we think a building can only have one story, and we picked South Main as the first floor. So the frontage and use at South State is the second floor. Because of the topo once again. But more importantly, we're not proposing retail. We're not trying to put a retail store into the hill, if you will. We're trying to put in a parking garage. The parking is, if we put in a parking garage under the ordinance, it's got to be used to support retail. We're not proposing retail. That's not part of our feasible performance standard for what this property can really needs. And I think Matt's comment about 15 proposals, I'm not sure, I have missed 17 proposals, all of them wanting money and from the city. Nothing worked. Nothing could be financed, could work otherwise. As to this site, and the site is quite unique actually because of the instant frontage on South State and South Main with the Fayette connection. Because of that, the hardships created by the topography of this site put us in a position where it's not going to work. So we're asking that there will be parking on the first story. It's usually not permitted, but then it's permitted underground. Well, when you get to South State, yeah, it's underground. and then, again, that's another problem with the impact of the topography on our site. It says parking, 28.548C, parking lots and structures. Once again, we're kind of repeating ourselves. To allow a variance for the requirement for non-residential use on the first floor of the building, to allow parking on the first story as an accessory to residential on the second floor. Once again, it's almost what I just said. The ordinance wants, in essence, the first floor to be commercial, and then parking below that to support commercial, not to support residential. It's a very interesting part of the ordinance that not only are they not trying to encourage some parking for residential, they actually prohibit it. So it's a variance to put in parking for residential under those circumstances. You also note, of course, we have a surface parking lot, which I mentioned earlier. But that variance is, the third one, is needed because of that requirement. Building to lines, an interesting concept. To allow a variance for the requirement that the front wall of the building be located at the front lot line or street right-of-way, and further relief that the portion of the street, South Main Street, be set back 10 feet from the line. And then further under that same section, to allow a variance from paragraph 1 of the article, to allow a variance for the provision that a public plaza no more than 20% of the street frontage could be occupied. We're not proposing any public plaza. And that the building be required to occupy 80% of the front property line. This building occupies less than 80%. Now, there's an interesting design feature, and if you look to the right, which is east on South Main Street, you'll notice the part that is closest to the parking lot, to South Main, but you also notice the wings on either side facing South Main Street. So we submit that when considering the amount of building that is actually facing South Main Street, that we consider the two wings of the building that literally go all the way up. And that gets us up into, I think it's the 80-foot range. But to try to further give that ambiance of a continuous entity along South Main, you'll notice the retaining wall along South Main to the south that continues, in essence, the kind of the feeling, the concept of the building being larger than it is. So the building itself, with those number of units in it, only needs to be a certain size. We provide that, but we've also tried to be sensitive to that frontage requirement.
I think one clarification, Ray, is he mentioned that there was not going to be any public space, but yes, we are extending the sidewalk in that area to create some more public space and bring it up to the building so that it is part of the streetscape, rather than having a grass strip that would normally be there.
Right, so part of that site is going to be conveyed to the city and will be public. Which gets the building closer to the main street right of way. You'll notice in item 4, there's a reference to portions of the building above 65 feet. That no longer applies. Once we got additional data, Mr. Creveling pointed out, and by the way, without him, we wouldn't be here tonight. He's done a magnificent job of going through the ordinance and the provisions and the design, and we thank him for that. But once we got all the measurements, he pointed out that the top floor was below the 65-foot elevation. So that element of item 4 is not needed and withdrawn. But there is other parts of it, and again, the provision that a public plaza occupy no more than 20% of the street frontage. Well, number one, we're not having a public plaza, and this is another example. Yeah. Well, it's a small area. It's not going to be a big sit-down plaza. It's going to be what Doug just described for you, and that will be part of the public space. And then at no more than 20% of the street frontage of the property be part of that plaza, and then that the building be required to occupy 80% of the front line of the property. Once again, we've discussed that. It's kind of a repetition, but we don't want to leave a section of the ordinance untouched when it puts in a requirement more than once. Article 28.5, 48I, ground floor occupancy and transparency. Well, let's do the occupancy first. We're repeating ourselves. It says along South Main Street to allow a variance from the requirement that there be 60% of transparent glazing, and we'll get to that in a minute, at ground level, and then that the street level, 60% of that the uses be the sale of goods and the provision of services and entertainment. Once again, we've heard this before, and the ordinance has brought it up again. So when you think about it, you're not giving away lots of easements here, variances here. The ordinance keeps saying some of the same standard, or providing some of the same standards and the goals, and we want to make sure we hit every one of them in getting relief. Now let's talk about the transparency. at one point, there was a discussion, what do we give you for an exhibit to show transparency? And we thought, here's an example of where a few words is probably worth 1,000 pictures, because the words aren't, you see through it. So you see through the glass, you see through the front. And then when we talk about the 1,000 pictures, the Flatley Company, actually at Matt's suggestion, recommended that we have a discussion with Kimball Jenkins. And they are very enthused about having a rotating display of art on either side of, you see those two front windows on either side of the entry. That'll be art inside, but visible to the public, and it'll be rotating. So at some point, we will have 1,000 pictures instead of the 1,000 words. I'll take care of the 1,000 words tonight. But we will have those pictures there, and they will be, I think, an addition to the community interest, and a good way of displaying the Kimball Jenkins achievements to the main street. Article 2878C2, access and driveway standards, circulation and separation of driveways in a non-residential district. Well, first of all, residential is permitted, so there's a little vagueness here, but, so we're not actually in a non-residential district, but we're not letting this one go untouched either, to be sure that we address it. So we do have an existing driveway on South State Street that goes into the property, just about in the location in the lower left of the plan that you see there. That's existing. I would point out that along Fayette, there's currently 3 separate driveways for vehicles to go in and out on Fayette. We're going, actually, all 3 of those will be gone, and what you see to the upper right facing Fayette is an entry and exit into the parking garage. That is, you know, if you've ridden by the property, you recognize that's one of the steeper areas of the site. But we've got to get cars into that first floor, and that's, we can't go too much further to the west without the topography making it impossible for us to get the vehicles in there. So we actually have the vehicles going in at one elevation and out at another. They end up at the same place inside the building. But to achieve that, we have a 44 plus, I think it's 44 feet, 3 inches or something like that, distance from the extremes of those 2, the entry and the exit. Craig Walker made a ruling before he left that design constituted 1 curb cut. Mr. Kriveling has confirmed that as his reading of the ordinance and of the design as well. But then where are we? Well, we've got 44-foot curb cut where 28 is permitted without some kind of variance relief. Well, the variance relief, among other things, is that area that you're seeing, that justifies the relief, I think, is that area that you're seeing in between the entry and the exit, just to the south of Fayette. And that's a pedestrian landing, if you will. As pedestrians are coming up or down the street, they only have to look at one spot. Cars are either going in or coming out, but not both. Then they get to an island, and there'll be signage there for them, and then they see if vehicles are coming the other way. There will be doors on that parking garage, so that when somebody is going in or out, the doors are going to be opening and then closing, and that's also a further warning. But there will be other indications for them there. There's some requirements along South State that there's going to be roughly 200 feet between driveways. Well, there's a requirement that's certainly on it in the violation. Right now, if you look where our driveway is, it's about in the same location, in the lower left-hand part of the design. Immediately below that is a driveway to the Eagles Club. And immediately below that is a driveway into the residential property. So we've got 3 driveways side by side. Actually, Doug met with the Eagles last evening, and I think we have a member of the Eagles here to talk about their, to give you their comments. I don't want to say one way or the other, but to give you their comments. And
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt. Is there any way when you speak that one of your team members has a laser pointer that you could point to something that we could see it when you talk about the driveways and Eagles?
that's a great idea.
Thank you. It should
That's
be
a great
done.
idea.
Raise slide back.
It should be done.
Okay, not only that, but it looks like Matt thinks we've got something to point with. Thank you. Every time I mention something, I look up to see if there's an arrow there. And there is that one.
I got a protein bar if you want one.
We could use the flag.
Of course I do.
It's not a laser pointer.
That one's the safe there, that one's an open.
Over here all
Every time I mention something, I look up for an arrow and it's not there. So,
Did we find something? No?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
okay, so,
So we were at the
We
Eagles
were-
Club driveway,
okay, well, our driveway.
our driveway, yep.
Yep, it's a little bit to the south of that, but it's generally, that's the end product location of the driveway. And then immediately, where you see the word garage and street, that's the driveway into the Eagles. And then immediately next to that is a driveway into a residential property. So there are 1, 2, 3 right there. And then the next driveway to the south is Thompson Street. So we're, first of all, it's an existing condition. It's been there for a long period of time. Probably don't need relief because it's a non-conforming, pre-existing non-conforming use, but we're asking for it just to be safe, that we have a variance from that requirement as it relates to the distance to Fayette Street and then also to Thompson Street. Parking lot landscaping required. Well, at this stage, the ordinance says, the zoning ordinance says, and Matt, point just above the word garage, point to that stretch right there, to the east-west. I'm sorry, perpendicular road, east-west, okay, right there. That we should have a 10-foot green space.
Ray, do we have John's civil plan on the computer, or no? I mean, is that available to put up on the screen too, or, I mean, we're looking at an architectural site plan, and when you get to the specifics of boundaries, the civil plan would be better to.
It's up right behind her.
Ah, there we go.
Okay, there you go.
You say the word, Mr. Krevling, we'll make it happen.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Actually, we're a pre-existing non-conforming use, and there was, as I said, last evening, a discussion with the Eagles, and do you want to address?
What Ray is trying to say is the property, as you saw in the aerial, is paved right to the edges of the sidewalks on Fayette and South State. So the area that we're working with here is paved across from the city property right now onto that 10-foot property that the Eagles have as part of their facility. We were notified by the Eagles after we had submitted this, and their concerns was access, and being only a 10-foot wide physical property that they have about 8 parking spaces, but more importantly, they have a couple of trucks a week and a trash truck that come in, and it's very narrow. That's 10 feet property to property line. So with fencing and curbing, it was very difficult to navigate. So in meeting with them last night, we're going to offer them, or we're going to do a 3-foot easement or fee that will allow them to have wider access for that driveway for functionality. So we're here tonight, having a grandfathered condition of pavement across there, and we're asking for the waiver on the 10-foot landscape strip in order to work together on access and flow for this project.
So the strip we see there would not be part of the final plan?
No, it's going to be reduced down to 24 inches. We're going to do a raised curb, and we're going to put a fence on it.
I see.
But that was really to allow them, it was making that driveway inoperable for them in its current 10-foot dimension.
And of course, Mr. Chairman, we are asking for the variance so that we have that 2-foot strip, but not a 10-foot strip.
And I think in summary of some of the things that Ray has said, there's existing conditions like the curb cut on South State Street. We understand that it may be grandfathered, but, in essence of working with the schedule that we negotiated with the City of Concord to, get this project permitted and underway, we wanted to make sure we had everything lined up this evening. And even if things that were borderline, like, okay, the curb cut's there, but they want a 200-foot setback, we still wanted to bring it to the board in order to have review for that so that all our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed on this project.
And on the notice, you'll note the special exception, which is about the third or fourth time we've visited this issue, but it's a separate section of the ordinance. And we're asking for a special exception to not build a commercial parking structure for non-residential uses. In other words, for commercial uses at street level of a parking structure, but rather to construct a parking structure for residential parking. So it's at least the third, if not the fourth time that the ordinance has brought that up, and we just want to make sure we hit every one of them in terms of the relief.
And again, to emphasize as to the program of the project, we understand that parking is not a requirement for this, but in light of the commercial businesses and the parking structures in effect that a lot of them, the long-term leases are very minimal availability. It was a decision to put parking both under the building and on surface. We have 60 spaces for 64 units, so we're really taking care of the needs of the project within the footprint, and that's what generated the need for that, as Ray said, the first floor. But we did not want it to be a blank wall. We did not want it for someone looking into an area where they're parking. So we created the storefront. We created the storefront windows for the art display, which, as he mentioned, we're working with Kimball Jenkins. And it will be actually finished off with drywall and wall petitions that are decorated so that you're not going to see inside. It will look like a normal storefront to respect the streetscape of the downtown city.
And I want to just go back on that Fayette parking, entry in the curb cut, to point out that what is permitted is a 28-foot curb cut under the ordinance. But because of the topography that we've talked about, and that area, it is going to be wider, and we're asking for a variance to cover that as well. If you have any questions for us, we're here.
Questions from the board? Yes?
If you can put in a storefront, why can't you put in a store?
Well, first of all, as I said, the evaluation of the program for this project, there are many storefronts in downtown Concord already that aren't even, they're vacant. This area, the need of the parking is a important part of a housing, and by doing that and occupying this level, the other issues that we evaluated with it, as Ray was starting to discuss, is the whole operational issues with it, trash and deliveries and all of that. It's a very tight site on Fayette, so it was making it very difficult in order to get something in there that could function. And at the same time, as I said, we looked at the overall program of this project in relation to the downtown, felt that parking and not impacting current parking that's available public in the city was important for us to take care of our own.
Okay, thank you.
One of the questions that came up at ADR recently was whether, this building's going to be here a while. and whether the construction type would allow for eventual modification if a new owner bought or there was
cars became obsolete.
or, I mean, we've seen huge changes in the real estate markets just in the last 2 years, so who knows where we'll be in 5 years in terms of what market forces there'll be. So the answer to that is yes. I mean, we're building a fire separation, a steel structure that supports a garage today, but the space has a storefront, is connected to the street, and is at the right elevation, is fully accessible, and the use could evolve if the will was there.
And if the demand comes along to support it, it's probably going to have pretty good rent, so they would be very happy to do that, but it's not there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Other
you. Good
questions? Nick, any questions?
No.
Jim?
No, thanks, you're pretty
Thank you.
thorough.
Andrew?
Maybe you answered this, and I just didn't catch it. The building will, this is on number 4, the building to the lines, and that the building is supposed to occupy 80% of the front property line, and you say the building will occupy less than 80%. What percentage will it occupy?
65.
65, okay. And then on the transparent glazing, so you are gonna have transparent glazing, but not 60%, and that ties into the art display?
Yeah.
Roughly what percentage can you, I mean, so whatever you're using for the art display is basically taking away from parking, is that, like, you're gonna
Well,
have a designated?
it's a shallow shadow box, so to speak, design, so it's about 3 feet deep. You can see on the plan that the parking spaces still park behind it.
Right.
Also, to create ADA accessibility for residents to get out onto South Main Street, they can come down the elevator in the garage. There's that crosshatch area that runs to the door. There's a ramp system as well as a ramp out on the sidewalk. So, we feel that a lot of our residents will be more pedestrian once they're home and come out that entrance and exit on Main Street to go to the different businesses.
So is it 60% of the frontage that's supposed to be transparent glazing? Is the idea they want, it sort of ties into the retail, they want people walking by to be able to window shop and stuff, so it doesn't quite make sense for parking.
Lono, if we talk about an 80-foot overall width, we're more than 50%. We're probably just shy of 60, based on that.
We have the percentage of the frontage, but the frontage is not at the full 80%. So you get into the math, and maybe we need an exception.
So it's 60, so 48%, 60% of 80% is your front, okay.
That's good math.
You a tax lawyer? Any other questions from the board? There were a couple of items that were mentioned in your application I just wanted to touch on briefly. One had to do with the setback from South Main Street and the door swinging out of the front entrance. Do I understand it correctly that one of the reasons for pulling the building back is so that the doors are not opening onto the public sidewalk?
That is correct. There is a landing area at the top of the ramp. It's also a couple of steps, and the door swinging out will not project onto the public sidewalk and right-of-way.
And the door swinging out is a code requirement, correct?
Yeah, it has to swing out as an egress door, so it needs to swing out.
Okay.
I think that's a fire code requirement.
It has to swing out, and it can't swing out onto a public way, so.
Right.
And the ramp isn't simple to make the grades work also, so that extra, we're talking about we're 4 feet off, 4.7 feet, I believe, off the property line there. So that few feet helps.
Very good. And as I also recall, on that same street front, that there is a retaining wall and a fence, a landscaped area that continues the line of the building. Is that true?
Yes. No, could you point that out, because
Go to the elevation
it's
page.
actually a pool area as well.
So you can see, we did a combination of a brick low wall with iron, black fencing. There's an entry element, so, during better weather, residents will be able to come through that gate area to access the street, because there's also a door to the building over by the parking area. So, you know, it continues the look of the building and material right to the other lot line.
It's worth pointing out that this is one of the things that ADR wanted to take a closer look at next month in terms of materiality. Some people didn't like a gate, some people liked a gate, so the street front could evolve per ADR comments.
That's, gate or no gate is probably not a zoning issue, but.
Right, exactly, but just the expression of
Definition
material.
the street front is.
Yes, right.
And we hope that grasps the concept of flow of the building and materiality of the front, and giving it that massing, even though it's, the building itself is the residential portion.
Very good. While you're here, gentlemen, shall we touch on the, is there anything more on the special exception? Did you want to touch on that?
Well, I think we should. The special exception, it's a special exception to not build a commercial parking structure for non-residential uses at the street level of a parking structure, but rather to construct a parking structure for residential parking. Have you heard that before? This isn't the fifth time, but it is. We're going through the ordinance. So what we're saying once again is we're building by right, we could build a parking structure a floor down for commercial. We're building it on the first floor, and then it's being built to support residential, not to support commercial. So, interestingly enough, we can get, by getting a special exception, we are permitted to do that, although the other sections seem to point towards a variance, so we've done both.
I see. Any other questions?
Thank you, that was a great question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you.
And thank you for your efficiency in presenting the case.
Getting old.
I know the feeling. Is there anyone who'd like to be heard in favor of this appeal?
Thank you all.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Please come forward. Swear to tell the truth.
Absolutely.
May we have your name as you testify, please?
My name is Keith Dane, and I'm a Board of Trustees on the Concord Eagles Club. So
Keith Dane?
Dane, yep, D-A-N-E. So we met with Matt Walsh and Doug last night because we had concerns over being only a 10-foot driveway in there once they blocked off the, made their parking area. In 1937, when we bought the building from the school, they made a 10-foot right-of-way for us in. But we also, for all them years with the state, we always had the parking lot to be able to come in and get our deliveries and get our trash out. So when this came about, we were very concerned because there's no way we're going to be able to get a dump pickup or deliveries down a 10-foot driveway.
So you were getting access across the estate's property at the time?
We always did,
partially.
yeah, for 87 years, basically.
Right.
So we brought the concerns up with Doug, and last night we came to agreement to get rid of that 10-foot buffer. They were gonna give us 3 more feet, which would give us 13 feet, which we could get trucks in and out to our location so we could continue our business as we need. So that's why I'm here, because we've kind of come to an agreement. And it won't affect us like it would have before,
Any questions from the board? Thank you.
Okay.
Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard in favor? Please come forward.
Yes, sir. My name is Don Rapp. I live at South State Street.
Can I swear you in? Swear to tell the truth.
Sure.
And could I get your name again, please? Don?
Don Rapp, and 20 South State Street, and I have a home is directly across State Street from the property being discussed.
What would you like us to know?
Pardon?
What would you like us to know?
I've read through all the ordinances, and I'm fine with all of them. I think it's positive in general. It's good resolution for a difficult piece of property, but I have one exception. I object to the wording. I want to, the exception to zoning code, item 7 on your list, Article 28.7-10A, parking lot perimeter landscaping required. What was discussed a little bit earlier about providing extra width driveway for the Eagles, that's all well and good. I like that idea, but that's not what the article ordinance says. It specifically talks about required along the collector road on South State Street. So that's the part of it that I'm concerned about. And I think it needs to be rewritten to clearly indicate that is relief only to the frontage of the parking lot as described in the architectural renderings, that the 10-foot depth of landscaping to be reduced is only that needed to accommodate the parking spaces bordering State Street. And those parking spaces were numbers 11 and 12 on a previous architectural drawing. And looking at the architectural rendering, it appears to me that 3-foot depth of landscaping can be incorporated at the end of the parking area and the driveway to State Street there. And so there's two parts to this, is that relief, as it's worded right now, applies to all of South State Street frontage. And I would like it reworded to say that it's only for the driveway facing State Street.
I think your concern is actually taken care of by the fact that any relief that they are granted is based on the documents that they present. So if the design were to change, the relief would not obtain.
That's not what the wording here says, though. It says to allow parking lot perimeter landscaping required to allow paving to the property line where a landscaped area of 10 foot is required along a collector road, South State Street. That means they could pave anything on the west boundary there along State Street, right?
And what I'm telling you is I don't believe you're correct. They
Yeah.
could not do that.
That's what it says.
Well, what the chair is saying is they're limited by their plan.
Okay.
Regardless of what
Okay.
your point is understood about the variance, but they're limited to what's in their plan.
Okay. And I would like to see that it would benefit both to the city and Flatley if they provided fencing and landscaping similar to that of the parking area at the Concord Housing Authority, about three doors down the street on the corner of Taunton. And they did refer to some wrought iron gate facade on the front facing Main Street. I think that would look good all the way along the back area. I noticed on the architectural renderings that they provided tonight showed some trees on the back end of the property there, which is what I'll be facing all the time. The earlier ones did not, so I'm just wondering if they're committed that will be landscaped along there?
So we can meet with you, and you're welcome to come to the planning board meeting, because that's where they'll review the landscaping, and we'll have a full landscape plan. But I can meet with you before the.
Okay, yeah, I'd like to do that.
Absolutely, because as you're saying, our intent is only that roughly 60 feet of parking is as that.
Is
Everything
exception,
above
yes.
that is a grassed landscape area shown
Along Fate Street.
along
Yeah,
State
okay,
Street,
right.
yes.
Okay, thank you, sir, for your consideration.
I'll
I'll get- yeah, you can- it's
What,
up to you.
what did you say your address is again?
I'm at 20
20 South State.
Is that
Directly
a si-
across on State Street, right behind.
Right there.
Is that a single family,
That
that's
is
a
my
single
building.
family residence?
That's what, this is what I'm gonna be seeing
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah,
So that's why I wanted to see some landscaping.
sure.
All right, thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard? Please come forward.
Is this for any comment or just in favor of?
No, you can, any comment. Swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth.
That I do.
May we have your name, please?
Ronald Rayner, resident here in Concord on Rumford Street. So I'm going to speak to not some of the technicalities, the minor details. If I was a butter, a contiguous property adjacent there too, I'd be concerned with some of this. But I'm going to speak in a broader, much broader sense, bigger picture, which really focuses on parking. And my strong view that the number of spaces allotted is really deficient. The representatives tonight indicated, patted themselves on the back, complimented themselves that they never asked the city for money. Okay, that may be true, but they also got the property for a song and a dance. So indirectly, they were paid. Secondly, with regard to the number of units, the market rate apartments at 64, I look at it as, since they're going to be a market rate, it's going to be middle class and above. I look at it as 2 vehicles per unit, particularly when there are families or they have guests, out of town guests, family members from in town, out of town, an average of 2, that's 128. They're providing 54. That's a deficiency of 74.
Let me jump in here for a moment. Your points may very well be well taken. However, this board has no power over the number of parking spaces that they use.
So what the applicant indicated earlier, and I've only looked at some of these documents this afternoon for about 45 minutes, when the applicant indicated that there is no requirement, I've worked with lawyers for 45 years, when there's no requirement for parking spaces for residential units downtown. Is that correct, Matt Walsh?
That is a correct statement under the ordinance. This actually could be built with 0 parking spaces.
Okay.
Let's not have a back and forth between.
No, I accept that. So I just want to make the comment that, indirectly then, that we should be gratuitous, appreciative that they're offering 54. I'm going to make it very clear that it is a gross and appalling deficiency in the city ordinance that it doesn't require some parking spaces for residential units. I maintain, again, that with 54 spaces, when the CCA has activities, Main Street is ongoing, where are these people going to park? In the documents, in the articles that I saw, the city made the statement that there is ample parking in the downtown garage. Bull. So, again, I would suggest that these people be given a sticker that would be on their window that would actually either force them to park in either the 54 spaces or in the store street garage, but not on the main street itself because they're going to impede everyone else.
We might agree with you 100%, but there's absolutely nothing we can do about that.
And again, that goes back to the appalling deficiency in our own city ordinance that needs to be changed and modified. This is going to haunt the city of Concord for years to come. There's going to be a lot of animosity and a lot of frustration about inadequate parking. I support the concept of residential units downtown. That's fine. But, again, it comes to the number of spaces. It is grossly inadequate.
I think we've heard your point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard? Please come forward. You swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth.
I do.
May we have your name, please?
My name is Eleni Zervudis, and I've been a resident for Concord, New Hampshire for many years, and also one of the abutters to the property. I am at 37 South State Street, and one of the driveways that was discussed tonight. I'm not sure what this meeting is. So I need a little clarification. Has this been approved where 64 units will be going into this building?
It hasn't been approved. That's what we're here for. Although our particular remit is the zoning ordinance. And there are some specific requirements, several of them, you heard me read them before, concerning zoning, variances, and a special exception that they require. And we operate under a fairly narrow set of standards that we have to apply. There are many planning issues that would go into approval of this project that don't come through the zoning board. They will go through the planning board, and they will go through the city engineering staff and code enforcement.
Wonderful, thank you for explaining that. So my concern is, if I'm at 37 South State and I have 3 units, I think I'm required to have 2 parking spots per unit. So I would have to have.
That may well be, I don't know.
But you're saying this, it's out of this row. So I'm just saying that if the city of Concord has purchased this property, they have control of what goes, and one of their stipulations is we want retail on the first floor and residential's on the other floors. I think we need to stick that. If they're calling the first floor the basement, I'm not sure about elevations, but I certainly got some education tonight. I know Eagles and then the Feminist Health Center. Feminist Health Center's first floor is actually what they would be considering the second floor from the backside of State Street. So why can't they just do retail, which is what we wanted? Because I, as a resident, want to go downtown and go into boutiques and go into retail. I don't want to go downtown and have apartments. I think there's a beautiful location on Old Loudon Road. It's directly across Shaw's. I think they're trying to sell a few acres that would more than be ample land for parking and for these apartments, and they can walk across the street to the other plazas. And,
That, all of this may very well be true, but again, it's outside of our
without your realm. And thank you for letting me speak tonight. As a neighbor, I would definitely like to see some retail, even if it's 1 or 2 stores, and stick to the apartment numbers that would kind of fit into our neighborhood, or, you know, a different location. Thank
Very
you.
good. Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to? Any comment from code enforcement?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Damati, would you like to offer any factual clarification in response to anything you've heard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the board has answered the questions, and I really don't have anything to add. We're complying with the ordinance. We're getting the variances that are needed to make this work. We, as the board's pointed out, we're not required to provide any parking. We wouldn't do this project without parking. We want to have parking as much as we can get on the site, and we think we've maxed the site out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
With that, we'll declare the public testimony portion of the hearing closed, and I invite the board to discuss the matter. I'm going to start with... No. I'm going to start...
I don't want to start here either.
No. Is that a motion? Okay. I guess I'm going to start with myself, because no one else wants to talk to me about this. Laura?
Yeah, okay. I think it's a great project. And I think we need apartments in downtown. I have a concern about the variances seeking to have no commercial on the first floor, because it seems to me that the hardship you've described doesn't arise from the land. It arises from your program. It arises from your perceived lack of need, and your desire for parking, which isn't required, which I fully support the idea of parking. I don't have any problem with the parking being there. It just seems to me that you could build a store where you have a storefront and lose about 4 or 5 parking spaces, and that would not defeat the economics of the proposal. But I appreciate everything that's going on with the site. I appreciate the history of the site, and I could be convinced to vote in favor of those variances. I don't have any issues with the rest of the dimensional variances. You know, to a large extent, there are existing conditions on the site, and I think they all make sense.
Andrew?
Well, as far as I can tell, and I think this is essentially pointed out, all or virtually all of these variances relate to the one fundamental question, which is, do we accept that they can have parking instead of retail on the quote first floor? And We have had cases in the past, on a much smaller scale, where applicants downtown were looking to avoid retail on the ground level under some basically similar argument that there was just not enough demand for retail, that it wasn't economically viable. This is obviously basically in the extreme of that. And so I guess to Laura's point, is that a true hardship that it's not economically viable? I don't want to put words in her mouth, but is that an actual hardship, or is that just a preference? I mean, in my mind, and I mean, it's pretty well documented. I mean, this has been going on for 10 years now, that they can't find any developer to develop this in really an economically viable way that doesn't require some kind of subsidization, and even with that, numerous variances of some sort. I think just the economics being what it is, it's pretty unrealistic that they're going to have an entire block full of retail stores, when the truth is most of downtown is having a hard time with full occupancy of their retail as it is. So I think it's true, they really need the parking. It seems like the logical place for it would be where they're putting it. And to the point of the people who are objecting, they're actually what we're doing is addressing their concern more than acting against it. We're being asked to give some parking where theoretically there would be none. They could come in here, I think, with almost no variances and have no parking, but that would defeat what, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, but what the gentleman was saying. No, the man behind you was saying, yeah. I mean, that serves your concern more than, competes against it. I know it doesn't fully address it, but I don't see how they could have more parking. So that's my opinion.
Most of the variances are because of the first floor parking, and I think what I heard was that if they decided that the front door was on State Street, then the parking would be in the basement, right? So there would have been and as I look at the elevations, it looks to me like, even though they're calling the first floor, it really looks like a lower level. It's, as we've all seen, it's a very challenging site to make it work, so I don't want to second guess the economics of losing 4 or 6 parking places. And then I think we compound the parking problem if we put retail there. Probably end up being a bank, right? Because
or a hairdresser.
Or a hairdresser, yeah. Then when those people arrive, where are they going to park? So I'm comfortable with the variances given the realities of the site, the hardships associated with the topography. It's built into a hill, and I could see the parking as either on the first floor or the lower level, depending on your perspective on it.
Nick?
Yeah, I think it's a great plan. I think the fact that they're providing all this parking that isn't required, I'm not persuaded that you really need a retail spot in that part of town. There's minimal retail, concentration of retail, so I don't think it would be really feasible to have it. So I'm pretty comfortable with all the variance requests that were asked for, and the special exception.
I am as well. I think they've made the case for hardship in 2 ways. One, both of which the board has accepted in the past in other cases. One, in the contours of the land, creating unique difficulties that interfere with their ability to comply with the zoning ordinance. And in the other case, as to the use part of it, which is the storefront, we have found in the past that repeated failure of the market to support a use that the zoning calls for constitutes a hardship as well, and that the economic situation of the property perhaps is a feature of the land. So, from my point of view, I would be willing to support a motion to approve both the special exception and the variances, although I think they should be separate motions. Would anyone care to make a motion? Let's go with the variances first.
Yeah.
Well, I'll move approval on 1, 2, and 3 because they're all similar in terms of parking.
All right.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded to grant 1, 2, and 3. 1 is the first story of the building be used for parking. 2 is to allow a non-residential use in the first story. And 3 is to allow a non-residential use in the first story because we were kidding the first time. To allow parking on the first story as an accessory use to a residential use on the second floor above. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right, I'll call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The vote is unanimous. All 3 items are approved. The variances are granted. That brings us to item number 4, building to the lines.
I think we heard that the reference to the, I'm sorry, I'll move to approve item 4.
Mhm.
But I think we heard testimony suggesting that the issue with regard to the height restriction is no longer necessary.
Yeah, we're not approving that because it ain't there no more.
Right, okay. So with that, I will move approval of item 4.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The vote is unanimous. The item number 4 variance is granted. That brings us to the ground floor occupancy and transparency. This is the retail, or lack thereof, and the city requirement for a storefront or something that looks like it on the South Main Street facade.
I move approval of variance number 5.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Again, the vote is unanimous for item 5, the ground floor occupancy and transparency. That brings us to Article 6, access and driveway standards, circulation separation of driveways. This had to do with, I believe, the 200-foot requirement both along Fayette and South State Street. We heard testimony that the existing conditions make it impossible to avoid that conflict because of the size and shape of the lot. Anyone care to make a motion?
I will move approval.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion?
I think they said they weren't sure if they needed this because essentially it's been this way for many years. So that could also be grounds for the variance if they even need it.
Very good. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The vote is, again, unanimous. Number 7, parking lot perimeter landscaping required. This had to do with the landscaping along South State Street.
I'll move approval of this variance.
Is there a second?
Second.
I think we should,
Subject to the plan that was submitted.
yes, subject to the plan that was submitted, and I think it's also worth noting something that was in Matt Walsh's letter to us on the subject of the hearing, which is that this is an improvement over what is there now. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The vote is unanimous. And now, item 8, that is driveway widths, the 44-foot wide driveway with the center strip in the middle.
I move that we approve variance to allow the driveway of 44.3 feet in width.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The vote, again, is unanimous. That takes us to case 1222. This is the special exception to permit the commercial parking structure for non-residential uses at the street level, not to have a commercial parking structure. I don't think we've ever granted permission to not do something. This is a new experience for me, and I've done this for a long time.
I'll move approval in that it meets requirements A through I.
Very good. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The vote is unanimous. The special exception is granted. Good luck, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Thank you, board.
That brings us to case, this copy of Webster's Dictionary over here. That brings us to case 0822-120 122 Pleasant Street, IS Institutional District. Property owner here is Concord Coalition to End Homelessness, and the applicant proposes to convert 2 existing residential buildings from a total of 4 units to 8 units, and is seeking variances to the table of principal uses, A11, conversion of a residential building to accommodate not more than 5 units, and Article 2853B1, minimum lot size to allow a residential conversion on a lot containing 23,087 square feet, or 25,000 are required. Item number 3 of this appeal is to Article 2853B1, minimum lot size to allow a total of 8 dwellings in 2 buildings, 2 dwellings in one and 6 in the other, on a lot containing 23,087 square feet of land where 4.6 dwellings would otherwise be allowed. And Article 25.3B4, minimum size of dwellings to allow dwellings of various sizes with no new dwelling being less than 320 square feet in gross floor area, where a minimum dwelling size of 600 square feet for a 1-bedroom conversion is required. And to Article 28.7, access, circulation, parking, and loading, applicability to allow the continuation of concurrent non-conforming parking lot layout with 8 parking spaces, where a fully designed, engineered, paved parking lot providing 16 spaces would be required. Good evening. Would you swear to tell the truth and nothing but?
I do.
Would you identify yourselves for the record as you testify, please?
I'm Ellen Groh. I'm the Executive Director of the Concord Coalition to End Homelessness, and I live at 86 School Street, about a half a mile from the property.
And my name is Philip Hastings. I'm an attorney with Moores and Bass and represent the coalition.
What would you like us to know?
Thank you. Thanks for the chance to present tonight. So we're proposing to convert this existing multifamily property that has a total of 4 apartments into 8 smaller apartments, all studios and 1-bedrooms, in support of our mission to end homelessness. So we did send over to Mr. Krivling just yesterday, these were made ready, which is some draft floor plans. So I brought copies that I could send around, pass around, so that it'll be a little more clear how we're getting all these units into that existing property. The property has 2 buildings on it. The bigger one we call the main house, and then it has a detached carriage house. And in the main house, there's 2 apartments. One's a 4-bedroom apartment, and if you go all the way to the back to pages 11 and 12, that'll show you what we're planning to put in there. So the main house has a 4-bedroom apartment with 4 bedrooms all upstairs and kitchen, living room, that kind of thing downstairs. And it has an attached 2-bedroom apartment with 2 bedrooms upstairs. So 6 bedrooms altogether in that main building. And we would turn that into 6 studios and 1-bedrooms. If you want a minute to look at it, there would be basically 2 apartments downstairs in the main house, 2 apartments upstairs in the main house, and in that little, we call it the L, the little attached 2-bedroom thing that sticks off to the side. We'd have a studio downstairs and a studio upstairs. And then in the detached carriage house, it currently has a studio upstairs and a studio downstairs, and we'd be leaving those essentially unchanged inside, and building an exterior staircase that would connect the 2 buildings, an enclosed exterior staircase that would connect the 2 buildings and provide more access, more safety access.
That doesn't show on this plan.
That doesn't show in that plan. It shows in the site plan that was sent over with the original application.
With the application itself?
So the units will be small, but they'll be totally functional. Again, these are preliminary drawings that just got finished, but they do give you the essentials. The smallest unit would be 343 square feet, and the largest is 547 square feet. And so all of this is in support of our mission to end homelessness in Concord. These apartments would be prioritized for people experiencing homelessness, and they would be financed through the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority and through Community Development Block Grant funds. So they would be affordable to someone even if their only income is disability payments, which is about $800 a month. So it's very hard find an affordable apartment if that's what you make. But these apartments would be affordable to someone even at that level of income. So I'll give you a tiny bit of background about us. We were formed in 2008. We operate 2 programs that address crisis needs of people who are homeless. One is a daytime resource center where we see 40 to 60 people a day that can take a shower, do their laundry, see a case manager to help them connect with services. And we run an emergency winter shelter that can serve up to 40 people a night. We're seeing 30 to 40 people every night. About 150 unique people, individuals use the shelter over the winter, and about 600 unique individuals use our resource center over the course of a year. And those crisis services are very important, but they don't actually end homelessness. The thing that ends homelessness is permanent housing, an apartment. And so these apartments are all part of that effort. We currently operate a few different permanent supportive housing programs. One is a scattered site program where individuals rent an apartment around town from a private landlord. And we also, as an agency, own 2 buildings ourselves. We just purchased a triplex at 12 West Street this past November in support of our mission. And we also converted a building at 10 Green Street a couple of years ago from an office building into 4 one-bedroom apartments. And we got several zoning variances for that one as well. So in total, we can currently provide housing for 22 people in our permanent supportive housing programs. And in all of the housing that we're working with people, the tenants have rental assistance, which is what allows them to be able to afford the rent, but also have the apartment be able to stay in the black financially, be able to afford the expenses of an apartment. All of the 2 buildings that we own are managed by a professional property management agency, Concord Housing and Redevelopment, and we plan to engage them. They've already agreed to be the property manager for the Pleasant Street apartments. And in all of the housing that we provide ongoing case management support to help the people who have just become housed learn how to follow the rules of the lease and stay stably housed and connect with whatever services they might need in the community. And we will, again, provide that kind of ongoing case management support services in the Pleasant Street apartments as well. So this whole model of providing rental assistance and supportive services is sometimes called the Housing First model, and it is considered a best practice for ending homelessness nationally. And so expanding opportunities for this kind of permanent housing is key to ending homelessness in Concord. We will not get there without doing this. You cannot read the newspaper today or watch TV without hearing another story about the affordable housing crisis and just the general housing crisis in the country and in New Hampshire and in Concord. So the city of Concord does have a plan to end homelessness, and in that plan it calls specifically for creating more affordable housing and more housing first units such as this. And the steering committee for that plan endorsed CCH's strategy paper on ending homelessness, which calls for adding more permanent supportive housing in this manner to carry out the plan. In their February priority setting session, the City Council specifically included affordable housing and homelessness as their priorities, is one of their priorities, 2 of their priorities for the next 2 years. And finally, the New Hampshire Council on Housing Stability, which was formed by Governor Sununu in November of 2020, set as one of their goals in their strategic plan to increase the production of publicly financed affordable housing with supportive services, such as we're trying to do here. And they set a specific goal of trying to increase the number of housing units by 13,500 by 2024. So a lot of housing is needed, and we feel like we're helping in a very small way with our 8 units. So this conversion of 4 apartments into 8 apartments is aligned with all of those public policy priorities. But those priorities won't get anywhere without action steps. So we feel like this is a very meaningful action step to advance all of those public policy priorities. What's unique about this particular situation is that with this financing that we expect to receive from New Hampshire Housing Finance Agency comes the ongoing rental assistance. That's what makes this all work, makes it affordable to the person who only has a disability income, and also allows the apartments to function and be professionally managed and continue to operate in the black going forward. And the reason that that financing is available is because we would be creating new units. That's what they want to see, so that's why they'll let you have the rental assistance with that. I want to emphasize that these apartments are going to be just like any other apartment that you or I or anyone else might rent. It's not a group home, it's not congregate living, it's not transitional housing. A person might live in this apartment for the rest of their life if they so choose. The units will be prioritized for people who are referred from our resource center. And because we serve primarily single men and women, the one-bedroom units and studios are an ideal configuration. It allows each person to have their own space and not have to navigate the kinds of roommate issues that I'm sure we're all aware of from our own lives. It can be more challenging to live with someone, especially if they're not your partner. So it works better to have a one-bedroom or a studio unit. It also makes it easier for the property management, because if there is a problem, if there is a lease violation, it's much easier to pinpoint where is the issue coming from and address it and possibly evict the person if that's necessary. But it's just much easier to manage the property that way. And the apartments, even though they're small, we believe they are more than adequate, and the small size can actually make it easier for the tenant to maintain it and keep it clean. While we're increasing the overall number of units on the property, or asking to do that from 4 to 8, the number of bedrooms is not going to increase. So we're not actually increasing the population density that is possible in these two buildings. You could have 8 adults living there right now by right. We're just trying to have 8 adults live there in their own apartments. We believe that our proposal fits in with the overall character of the neighborhood. Many of the homes at that end of Liberty Street are multifamily housing right now. And this kind of infill housing that maintains the same nice streetscape and kind of walkable feel is actually being promoted across the country as a way to solve this housing crisis. And finally, we think this particular location is uniquely suited for what we're trying to do. It's actually in the institutional zone, right on the border from a residential zone. It looks out on the state office grounds. It's very near commercial, an office, and a hotel, and a school parking lot. So it's really in a more institutional setting on that side of the road. But it's very close to downtown. You can walk to downtown, and it's on a bus route. Many, if not most of the people we serve do not own a car. So this is key, to be on a bus line and in walkable distance. And for instance, in our Green Street apartments, not one of the 4 tenants has a car. So I appreciate your time. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Hastings for the more technical parts, unless you have questions for me before he goes into the technical parts.
Questions from the board?
You said 8 bedrooms. How many bedrooms are there now?
There's 8 bedrooms now.
There's actually 8 bedrooms too. Okay.
Because and you'll have a chance to address this, but some of the neighbors have concerns. When you sort of scope out, a project like this, are there any other neighborhoods in the city that you could look at where you wouldn't need as many variances, like downtown or anything, or?
No, I don't.
What kind of options do you look at when you look for locations?
We have been scouring for the last year for locations, and they are bought before we can get there to look at them. So, and every single one of them would have required a variance of some kind, I'm sure. But they were in this market, they really are. They're bought while you're driving there to take a look at it the day it goes on the market. So it's extremely, extremely challenging to find properties, and especially ones that can be divided up, like this one. Like the first thing we did, we brought our builder with us and walked through it, and our architect, and said, yep, we could do this, we could turn this, here's how it could work. So that all has to fit as well. Not every 3-bedroom apartment can be easily transformed into 1-bedroom apartments. This one is laid out really well to do that.
Other questions? Mr. Hastings?
Thank you. Ellen covered a lot of ground there. Our application covered a lot of ground. I'll just try to supplement what Ellen had said and emphasize a few points to bring it back to the variance standards, some of which blend together. I think the public interest on most of these variance requests is pretty clear. Homelessness in Concord, as elsewhere, is a significant issue, a significant public policy goal of the city and the state is to increase housing opportunities and to create this type of housing to move individuals out of homelessness. So in terms of the public interest, these variances are all consistent with those public policy goals. Speaking specifically to the density issue, the two variances related to creating 8 smaller units. By having 8 units in addition to the programmatic benefits of that Ellen spoke to, it reduces the per unit cost of the development in terms of renovating and using the project. Without that density, this type of project can't succeed because of financing and other economic reasons. So to deny those variances would be against the public interest of providing housing for the homeless, currently homeless. In terms of the spirit of the ordinance requirement, as Ellen talked about, the site is in the IS district. It's not in a residential district, although residential uses are permitted here. So when we talk about the neighborhood, it's almost a transition neighborhood between the more conventional, traditional residential neighborhood to the, I guess that would be the north, and the more institutional uses to the south, and some commercial uses. It's not too far from the Centennial. There's office buildings in that area. There's the school parking lot. So all of those uses are consistent with this particular use. The proposed variances will not impact health, safety, or welfare. There's some unique benefits of having this type of housing and these variances granted here. As Ellen spoke about, the 1-bedroom units really discourage families, whereas if you had larger units, you might have actually a more dense use in terms of population. From a safety standpoint, because you're not encouraging families, you're actually creating incentives to not have children on the property. As we know, Pleasant Street is a very busy use. It's on a bus route, so it's attractive for this particular use, but not really conducive to a more traditional family type housing. As to the parking, the parking-related variances that we're asking for, we're asking to keep the same number of spaces that exist now. So it would be 1 space per unit. Again, we're anticipating single occupancy units. Ellen has spoken to the fact that the likely tenants are not likely to have vehicles or tend not to have vehicles. So we feel like 8 spaces is the appropriate number for this particular use. If we were to, if we had to comply with the ordinance and provide an additional 8 spaces, it would detract from the character of the neighborhood by adding paved area where green space and lawn exist now. So the variance, granting the variances for the parking would be more in keeping with the spirit of the ordinance. substantial justice. There's no harm to the public by granting these variances, but as we've talked about, denial of variances would undermine very significant public policy goals. We submit that there's no diminution of value to the surrounding properties by granting these variances. The exterior of the buildings will remain largely the same. As someone on the board noted, there's the connecting stairway connecting the two buildings, but the buildings are in the same footprint. So we'll renovate an aged building with something newer. The total number of occupants, I think as Mr. Wallner noted, the total number of occupants will largely stay the same. There's 8 bedrooms now, there'll be 8 bedrooms afterwards. In terms of hardship, as we talked about, the location, the special conditions of the property are its location. The existing building, as Ellen spoke about, is particularly suited to support the 8 units in this size. There's certain fixed costs to renovate, so creating 8 smaller units will reduce that per unit cost and make the project more viable. Literal enforcement of the ordinance in this case will not undermine the general purposes of the applicable ordinance provisions. Conversion of the 8 units will have no effect on the actual population density of the site. The difference in the lot size requirements is relatively insignificant. It's a very minor non-conformance in terms of the lot size that we're seeking. Smaller units will allow a safer use in this particular location, and retaining the existing parking will be more conducive to the character of the neighborhood. And finally, the use is reasonable, it's needed, it's consistent with public policy goals, and will not alter the character of the neighborhood. For those reasons, we'd appreciate your support for these variances.
Thank you very much. Question, Ms. Groh, what's the duration of this financing package in the general arrangement? If you were to enter into this, how long does it last?
We agree to a 40-year affordability term, and the money is given as a loan, but it's 0% interest, deferred payment. So that's just to make sure you continue to do what you said you were going to do. And at the end of the 40 years, they usually forgive it. So it would stay in this use for 40 years, and that rental assistance should stay for that entire time as well. So it's a long-term commitment from New Hampshire Housing and from us.
Questions from the board? Anyone? No?
So I'm sure you covered this at the very beginning, but the current ownership and
So we bought it because we had to, because in this market, had we waited for this zoning board to, meet, that it would have been sold to someone else. So we bought it with a mortgage that we would take out with our financing that we're going to get. So we're the current owners.
who owned it just before you?
Renee Roberte?
And was it owner occupied?
No, it was rental, because there's 4 units there. No, she did not live there. She lives out of state.
Okay.
And actually, the other reason we were able to buy this is we had bought the West Street property from her, and she liked our mission, and she actually didn't put it on the market and told us about it and worked with us to get it together to buy it. Had it gone on the market, I don't think we could have got there in time. So it is really challenging for us to get these properties and make them work.
So what happens to the people that are living there now? Will they not?
It was mostly vacant. When she knew that she was going to put it up for sale, she let her realtor advised her it's easier to show it empty. So 3 of them were empty, and the one person is still there, and he's actually a supporter of ours, and he'll stay until this is all done, and then he'll move on. So.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone who'd like to be heard in favor of this appeal? Please come forward. Swear to tell the truth and nothing but.
I do.
May we have your name, please?
Roseanne Haggerty, and I'm here as a neighbor to the property and also someone who works professionally in the field of building housing for the homeless. So I would love to express my enthusiastic support for the project. I live 3 blocks away on Pine and State Street, and I'm a relatively new Concord resident. I've lived here about 18 months. I have to say that one of the things that attracted me to this beautiful community was the really creative way in which older homes have been renovated to create very comfortable multifamily buildings. The home I live in was originally a single-family home and is now 4 condominium units. And so I can appreciate the plans that the coalition has developed and how much in character the reuse plan is with the character of the surrounding neighborhood and the way that buildings have evolved to provide housing for different configurations of households over time while maintaining the lovely character of the neighborhood surrounding. And also, as someone who I have now for 30 years led not-for-profits that don't work actually in Concord, the joy of remote work. I moved here because my adult son lives in the community, but the 2 not-for-profits that I have founded and led have built supportive housing in 9 different communities around the country. And I can probably answer just about any question about how these buildings have fit into communities. We've built about 3,500 units of housing, and the quality of the design, professional management, having the appropriate services for those who need them make all the difference in creating a welcoming and beneficial environment for people who live in supportive housing as well as the surrounding communities. So I thank you for your consideration of this important project and very much hope that it will move forward.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard in favor? Please come forward. Swear to tell the truth and nothing but.
I do. Greg Lassard, I'm the Director of Housing Initiatives for the Concord Coalition to End Homelessness. I took the position to find housing for the long-term homeless in our community. One of the most difficult parts about it is they need an income. They need a way to pay the rent. So they can have a voucher that they take with them, or they're very, very limited. Or you can get project-based vouchers, as Ellen was saying. So the only way you can get a project-based voucher, also very rare, is to create housing, and Ellen went into that. But I just want to really stress that because this property has 8 bedrooms. So as Ellen said, you can have 8 adults living there today. We can have 8 adults living there tomorrow. But we won't get project-based vouchers. They don't have a way to pay the rent. And so if we take the time, the money, and all the energy to actually turn this into 8 individual units, then we can get 8 project-based vouchers. And 8 individuals will have a permanent place to live. So I think that it's very, very important to realize that what we're asking for, again, is you can absolutely have 8 individuals living there now. But we're going through an awful lot of effort so that 8 individuals can actually live there and exit homelessness because we're creating housing, which is mandatory. So taking it from 4 units to 8 creates the units, which allows us to obtain 8 project-based vouchers. We can't simply buy a property and get housing vouchers for it. When we purchased West Street, there were individuals that had their own vouchers, and we were able to, they were able to exit homelessness there. But there's very few individuals that are experiencing homelessness in our community that there's the tenant-based vouchers. And so then the next step is, well, how do you house them? And you have to create the housing. And this is one of the best ways that we know that it's within our scope, our limit, our resources to be able to solve this problem.
Thank you very much. Anyone else who wishes to be heard in favor? Is there anyone who'd like to be heard in opposition? Please come forward. Swear to tell the truth and nothing but. May we have your name, please?
My name is Chris Macris, and I live at 7 Liberty Street.
What would you like us to know, Mr. Macris?
Well, Mr. Chairman, before I start, I prepared a packet that I would love for each of the board members to have.
You bet.
Use as a reference.
Sure.
During my presentation and after. If you could pass these on, that'd be great. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
What was your address again?
7 Liberty.
7 Liberty.
Did you also sign this letter?
Did who?
Did you sign this letter? It's addressed 7 Liberty Street.
I possibly did, but I can't see the contents of the letter from here.
It was signed by you and Randy Blossom.
Okay, right.
Was that you?
Yeah.
Okay. What would you like us to know?
Well, I've prepared a short statement to read representing 11 abutters, including the direct abutter, and myself, along with 2 individuals who live only a few feet away from being identified as abutters, all of whom have signed letters in your packet. So I would like to begin by saying, Mr. Chairman and members of the Zoning Board of Adjustment, we, the undersigned, have read the proposed variances for the property at 120, 122 Pleasant Street. We acknowledge that the Pleasant Street corridor is zoned as institutional. However, we believe that the proposed variances would alter the current ordinances to the degree that erodes their original intent and purpose. Permitting them would have a lasting negative impact. We would like to make clear, very clear, that it's not our intent to attack the coalition. We're writing to oppose the variances requested in the developer's proposal. We firmly object to the proposed variances for the following reasons. First, we oppose the request for variances related to access, circulation, parking, and loading. We disagree with allowing a continuation of the non-conforming shared driveway. Submitted on the developer's plan is a proposed 12-foot driveway width instead of the required 24-foot for two-way access as required by Article 2877E. We acknowledge this appeal is before the zoning board, but stated in the city ordinances, Article 28711G, it clearly says, in no case shall the planning board permit a driveway designed for two-way traffic flow with a width of less than 18 feet. We're of the opinion that the ordinance was specifically created to ensure safe access and travel, and as a result, shouldn't be discounted. It should also be noted that there is no written agreement between the developer and the direct abutter and co-easement holder, whose signature appears on this letter, on the change of intensity and proposed paving of the shared driveway. Considering the limitations due to the existing driveway easement, only a portion of the 12-foot width would be able to be paved as shown on the site map in your packet. Additionally, the developer's proposal does not include the required parking setback, which is a minimum of 15 feet of separation between buildings and parking lots, cited in Article 2845D3, or the required buffer that physically and visually separates the adjacent land use, cited in Article 2845D5. Secondly, the variance requests for 8 dwelling units where 4.6 are allowed, as well as for the reduction in square feet for single units, are notable departures from what city ordinances currently allow. The proposal states that the property's density will not be impacted. We disagree with that statement. According to the developer, each of the 8 tenants has the right to reside with a significant other, as well as have friends visit. the probability of each of these would more than double the minimum density being proposed. Article 28.15, General Provisions and Purpose, states that a purpose of the zoning code is, quote, to avoid undue concentration of population, to prevent overcrowding of land, and to lessen congestion in the streets, end quote. We are firm in the belief that the case before you is attempting to fit too many units into the current space. The application also states that, quote, creating 8 units lowers the per unit cost without which the project cannot succeed, end quote. We're certain the board would agree that financial hardship should have no bearing on the granting of variances. Lastly, we believe that no hardship currently exists with respect to the property itself. These variances are not necessary in order to enable a reasonable use of 120, 122 Pleasant Street. This property has functioned well over decades as it currently does. In closing, if approved, these variances will make a property already in non-compliance become even more non-conforming. Again, we believe this proposal is asking too much in the face of too many constraints. We strongly and respectfully urge you to deny the variances being proposed. Now, before I yield my time, I would like to refer you, Mr. Chairman, and the rest of the board to the site map included in your packet. The boundary lines have been identified in red, and the proposed paving area has been shaded in. I believe in the copy that I made for you, it looks almost green.
It is shaded.
And I would call your attention to the Liberty Street side entrance. 2 days ago, the head of code enforcement stated that, quote, should an abutter have concerns regarding the zoning board's responsibilities for public safety in granting relief in the form of a variance, that abutter should bring it to the board's attention the night of the hearing. Mr. Chairman, the construction standards of the engineering department of the City of Concord are well thought out and reviewed by several committees and boards prior to adoption. To repeat, a driveway width of 24 feet is the standard requirement for safe two-way traffic, and the alternate parking arrangements ordinance, section 28.7.11G states, quote, in no case shall the planning board permit a driveway designed for two-way traffic flow with a width less than 18 feet. We want to go on record stating that what's being proposed with regard to the driveway is an unsafe and irresponsible design change request. Also included in your packet is the driveway easement. I've highlighted 2 parts of the driveway easement for you. It was created in 1875, which is highlighted at the bottom, and established an 8-foot shared passageway between 2 single-family homes. Nowhere on this document does it give permission to the appellant to make any alterations to the abutter's side of the driveway. And I'm going to throw one more comment in with regard to the 40-year mortgage or financing. I know a lot of people who buy homes on 30-year loans, and they're not bound to stay for 30 years. My concern would be allowing variances with especially the driveway as it is and parking, and then once this property is left and somebody else is faced with it, then we have real problems. So I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity. I hope I didn't run over 5 minutes.
Any questions for Mr. Macris?
Nope.
Thank you very much.
No, the only thing I have is I can't read half these signatures, so I don't know who these abutters are that you submitted.
The 1870s one?
Well, all this right
I
there.
can, I mean, if it's appropriate, I can help you out with that. I can show you the original copy.
Well, at some point, you probably just submit, get a printed copy of all these names for the record.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because some of them are rather difficult to read.
When, my fault, when would you need that by?
I think after the fact is fine with us, just as long as we have a record of their names.
Get it to you tomorrow.
Perfect.
Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard? Please come forward. You swear to tell the truth?
I do.
May we have your name, please?
Yes, my name is Fred Hagedorn, and my wife and I live at 4 Liberty Street, which is essentially across the street on Liberty from the subject property. I sent a letter to you all over the weekend, which I believe
We do
you
have it.
had, and so I don't think you really want me to read it all to you. But
We
if
did
you-
read it.
If you would like me to read it, I can, otherwise I'll simply comment upon it.
I think if you want to hit the highlights, that would be probably the most efficient thing to do.
That would be terrific. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are concerned about precedent. We are concerned about the precedent that permitting the change of 600 square feet as minimum for a single-person dwelling or single-bedroom dwelling will permit over time the other properties that are beside us, which are also rental, to do the same thing, to make that same request. Because once a variance is requested and approved, it becomes a precedent, and there becomes argument in favor of it. And the property next door to us at 118 Pleasant Street, owned by Randy Blossom currently, could very easily be owned by someone else in the future. And they might want to do the same thing in order to get more people into their building. To us, that is a problem. That increases the density on the street dramatically, potentially, in the long term. Continuing on with the thing about density, I listened to the proponent putting forward that there's 8 bedrooms and 8 people. But there's nothing that says that it must be only 8 people. There's nothing that says that these are single resident occupied spaces. It says that they are single bedroom spaces, single bedroom dwellings. I know that when I was much younger, I had a single bedroom dwelling that was quite small, that I had someone living with me in. And, you know, you make do. And if you don't have a lot of money, or if you're not able to succeed, or if you're having trouble, that's a great thing. But it increases the density of the space. So we could easily go from 8 to 16 to 32 without a whole lot of difficulty. One of the other comments that was made by the attorney was about safety and about children. Well, when we moved in 2020, in that space, in that building, on the first floor, was a family of 4, with 2 children, who happily lived there and happily were growing up and went to McAuliffe School, and were quite comfortable and quite safe. So to use that as an argument of safety, I find disingenuous, and certainly not factual. When we get to parking, currently, the proponent states that there's 8 parking spaces. I live across the street, and I walk across the street, and I look in there, and I don't see 8 parking spaces on their side of the driveway. I see about 4. If there are 8, I'm surprised, but okay. I'd like to point out that if there are more than 8 people there who need to park, they'll be parking on Liberty Street. They won't be parking on Pleasant Street, because there's no parking on Pleasant Street along where this building is. On Liberty Street, where we are, there is no parking permitted between 7 a.m. and 3 p.m. in order to keep the high school children from parking their cars along Liberty Street because it's a safety factor. Well, when we get to the evening, suddenly there are a lot of people parking on Liberty Street, on both sides of the street, to the point that you can barely drive down Liberty Street in one direction, even though it's a two-direction road. So if the density goes up and we have more visitors and we have more parking, where are people going to park? I don't know. I'm very concerned about the number of people who are going to be on this corner. Now, I grant you, we have a single-family home. The comment was made that at this end of the block, there are a lot of multifamily homes. Well, there's the one that is in question, which is in the IS district. And then there's number 3. And then there's number 3.5. And then there's number 5, which happens to be a Section 8 granted location where people have help in their rental payments, which then gets me, and then after that, it all becomes single-family homes again. And on my side of the street, there's a single-family home, a multi-family home, and then the rest are single-family homes. So it's mixed, but it's not all of this nature. And then my final question is that I understand the concept of scattered site, and I appreciate it. But when you start to have one home that is rent assisted in number 5, and then you have, I'll call it number 0, just from the standpoint of looking at it from Liberty Street, it's actually 120, 122 Pleasant, becoming another rent-supported home within within less than 200 feet. You start to wonder when we're starting to have a cluster as opposed to having scattered site. And so I am concerned that the property values will be negatively impacted. I am concerned that the justice to the neighborhood is being negatively impacted by these requests. And I firmly request that you look very strongly at the argument that I've made and that Chris and the other neighbors have made regarding the technical aspects of the zoning rules of our city and rule against this, refuse this request. The reality is that the 600 square foot minimum is not simply for IS, it's not just for RN, it's for every part of our city. It is what the standard is for our city, for a single bedroom home, as I understand the code. And if I have misread the code, please educate me. But I don't think I have. And I don't see where the hardship is in telling the people who own this property that they need to live up to that requirement. From a financial perspective, it's not there because, as they have easily stated, the property would sell quickly and someone would be willing to put in homes that are that size and rent them. Thank you very much for your time, and if you have any questions for me, I'd be glad to answer them.
Any questions from the board? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time and your patience.
Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard? Please come forward. Yes. You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but it?
I do.
May we have your name, please?
My name's Tom Farrelly, and my wife and I own 113 Lawrence Street. And by way of introduction, I've spent the last 36 years of my life in the commercial real estate business. Opened the office for Cushman & Wakefield down in Manchester, and I spend an inordinate amount of my life in evenings at meetings like this. And I've seen a lot of different requests. I don't know what the economic hardship is here that ties to the land, which is basically what these kinds of things are like the earlier applicant, the land just had a problem, and, you guys found your way to, this property had to be scooped up. I mean, so it's that valuable, performing just fine the way it is. I don't think the economic hardship should have anything to do with what you'd like to do with that property. It has nothing to do with what you would like to do. Frankly, I am concerned because the fact that it even says that two people, the applicant and the partner, you could have 16 people living in that house. And I always envisioned help for the homeless as being that hand up so you can establish stability in your life. And along with that usually comes some form of occupation, some form of a job. And I don't know how you're going to get a job if you don't have a car. So you could have 16 people living there, and say a third of them or half of them have cars. Where are they going to park? The whole plan, it's a great cause, but it's like 15 pounds in a 5-pound bag. And all I can say is it's going to set a horrible, can I do the same thing on my property at 113 Monroe? Can I come in and turn that into, 8 units right now where it's only 3? We're opening the door up for I think a challenging environment for this board to function in, because it's going to set a dangerous precedent with unintended consequences. And I just, I think parking and the ability to add cars into the lives of people who are trying to make a better way for themselves is critical, and it's being overlooked. And again, like I said, 16 people, the potential for 16 people living at that one property is way too much density. And the fact that, they went ahead and bought the property without having the permissions required to use it the way that they'd like to use it, that's not the kind of hardship that variances are based off of. Variances are based off of there's something so wrong with the property that we can't really do anything with it unless something radical or drastic needs to be implemented. And that's not the case at this building. That property is a beautiful property, and it's functioned great as a home and economically, obviously. Again, like I pointed out, the fact that the building had to be scooped up before someone else bought it, it speaks to me that there's plenty of things that could happen at that property that are not going to require all the variances that this use will require. And that's, I'm a native of Concord. I don't live here right now, and I have ties to the community. I own a few I have a 4-family and 2 families, and I'm providing affordable housing. It's not subsidized housing, but it's affordable. My rents are very reasonable. I support this kind of thing about, increasing the supply of housing. So it's not the specific use, it's how it's being proposed to be redeveloped. It just goes beyond reasonable. So that's really, I don't know.
Any questions from the board? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard? Please come forward. Swear to tell the truth and nothing but it.
I do.
May we have your name, please?
Yeah, Greg Marceau, 3.5 Liberty Street.
What would you like us to know?
I'll try and be brief, but I don't know if I have the ability to not talk. But most of my predecessors handled most of the things. I did send a letter. My 2 big concerns, one was regarding a variance, that the variance transfers with the property. I feel a little bit better because I was led, the initial application, I believe that the applicant didn't own the property at the time. They were representing the property owner, but it appears as though it has been bought. But along the lines of what Chris said, there's a lot of people in the world that buy houses with 30-year mortgages, and they don't live in them anymore. The banks have taken them, and things didn't go the way you planned. If this doesn't go the way it's planned, then you have a variance for an 8-unit market rate building. And, that's a concern. My biggest concern, well, I want to just back up really quickly with a couple of things that I didn't want to talk about or weren't in my thoughts but that the applicant did say. One statement was that, we need to have the critical mass really of an 8-unit building to make it viable, but they also testified that they have a 3-family on West Street and a 4-family on Green Street, and they're all working just great. So do we really need 8 units, or could we get by with the current 4 units that are there? That's number one. Number two, and I think Tom kind of hit it, the point was, you really can't confuse the fact that I have an 8-bedroom house, so I could have 8 adults, okay? Because really, it could be 16 adults. And they're two separate arguments, because you're talking about 8 separate dwelling units, which would not only be 8 adults, but could easily be 16 adults. The applicant testified that they would try and keep children out, but nothing about making them subject to single people, that only one person could live in a unit. So I just wanted to touch on that. My biggest concern was parking. And there is no parking in that area. Liberty Street is restricted during the high school year and the high school hours. You cannot park on that street. You can obviously not park on it during winter storms. There is some parking on Pleasant Street. You're not going to get a spot there because the high school kids take it all. And if they don't get it, then employees that work downtown have all gravitated up the hill because the meters are gone. As the city expanded the meters, they drove the employees and the folks that work downtown, rather than park all day and feed a meter, they've all gravitated up the hill. So there's very, very, very limited parking in that entire area. So again, if you did have 16 people or 12 people or whatever, you don't have adequate parking on that site. And I don't see a hardship, because they admit they could get the parking on that site. It just might change the look of the site and take away some of the open space. Having sat on a parking committee meeting recently on another piece of property, the city has just spent the last year or so doing a parking study throughout the city, looking at narrow streets, taking parking away from narrow streets, restricting parking, and really with a goal from what I got out of the meeting was to make sure we're moving forward, that we do have adequate parking on projects as we move forward. The applicant prior to this probably made the biggest case, could explain it better than I could. Both parties, those for and those against, were arguing over parking, that you need to have adequate parking on a project to make it a viable project.
I think we take your message.
Yeah, so that's it. Any questions?
Thank you very much.
It is a noble effort, and I wish them well. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Go for it.
Well, there is one more letter. It's the lengthy one, I think.
That would be the Greenwood letter?
Yes.
Yes, we have David and Melissa Greenwood, 6 Liberty Street, submitted a letter. They are in opposition to the appeal.
Did they testify, Chris?
I don't believe they did. I don't have any notes. I don't think so.
No, I'm sorry, they didn't.
No. They are in opposition to the appeal. They're concerned, their arguments are very similar to the ones that you've heard from others who are in opposition to the appeal. They're concerned about density. They're concerned about whether or not the buildable area of the lot is compliant because of the slope in some parts of it, and therefore they think that might be a zoning violation. They're concerned about smaller units. They're concerned about the shared driveway and insufficient parking and setbacks, and the consequences of parking on Liberty Street at night. And that's the gist of it. Any comments from code enforcement?
No, sir.
Very good. Mr. Hastings, Ms. Groh, would you like to offer factual clarification?
We would, thank you. In no particular order, here just as I was jotting down my thoughts. On the driveway, there was some discussion about the 24-foot standard for two-way traffic. This driveway will not be designed for two-way traffic. It's a residential use, so the intent is that you would have one car going out, one car coming in, not at the same time. And my recollection is that this board has granted those types of variances for residential uses before in that context. In terms of the argument that the shared driveway will be overburdened, again, the use that we're proposing is materially the same as what's there now in terms of density. There's a lot of speculation about excessive use, but that's not been the coalition's experience with this type of housing in the past. And in any event, the question about overburdening the easement is a private matter and not within the jurisdiction of the ZBA. There's been a lot of testimony that this property functions fine as it is, and the demand for housing is such in Concord that we could put all sorts of wonderful traditional, conventional housing on this property, all of which is true. But it's not the legal standard anymore that because there's other reasonable uses that it renders the use that's being proposed here unreasonable. You need to take the use that's being proposed on its own merits. It's not, we do not need to show that there's no other reasonable use of the property. The question about the density again, yes, you could have multiple people living in a single bedroom unit. You could have multiple people living in the existing 4-unit building that's there now. But again, and I think Ellen can speak to this a little more effectively than I can, based on the coalition's actual experience with this type of housing, it's unlikely to have multiple occupants in single-bedroom units of this type. And in fact, the design of the units being smaller than 600 feet is a tremendous disincentive from that happening. And again, based on, with respect to the parking, again, based on the coalition's actual experience, the likely residents of this housing tend not to have cars, and the residents who do have jobs need access to a bus route, which this property is ideally suited for. In terms of whether this variance will create a precedent for other homes in the neighborhood, you've heard the parade of horribles, but as you know, variances are tied to the special conditions of the property. What might be appropriate for this particular site would not necessarily be appropriate for something further to the north on Liberty Street or Warren Street or wherever the concern might be. Ellen, do you have anything to add?
Just one thing, and that's, I know that you need to make decisions based on the property in the future and whoever might own it in the future, and people have referred to, well, they could just sell it. This isn't like a 30-year mortgage that people get on their regular house. This is quite a process to get this funding that we're getting, and it comes with serious commitments that are enforced with land use restrictions on the property. So it can't just be sold and change your mind. You know, we're committed, New Hampshire Housing Financing Committee Authority would be committed for 40 years to this use. That's the way it's laid out.
Is that the land use restriction?
Yeah, it's in the law.
Recorded in the deed?
Yes, it is. So, and you know, we're a mission-based organization. We're here for the long run. So I know that can't be the total basis of your decision, but it is not just a whimsical thing that we would change our mind in 5 years.
Any questions from the board? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
With that, we'll declare the public testimony portion of the hearing closed. We have a request for, I think there were 4 variances. Five variances concerning conversion of an existing apartment house into a total of, was it?
8 units.
8 units. And request for variances concerning the number of units, the area of the lot, and the layout and number of driveway and the number of parking spaces. We heard testimony that the appellant cannot do the project without making these changes to the building. We also heard concern from the neighbors that the density that this would add or potentially could add to the area is inappropriate in terms of its burden on parking and other things. I'll start with you this time, Nick. What do you think?
Well, we heard some concern about the width of the driveway, but that's not one of the articles for a variance request. I don't know where that came up.
Maybe we should check in with Ernie on that.
Yeah, because it's on 5, it just talks about a continuation of the current non-conforming parking lot layout.
Right, that's,
It makes no mention.
So that covers that? Is that tended to cover that?
right.
Okay. So what you see is what you get, notwithstanding what the ordinance asked for.
Well, that's what they, I mean, that's the way that they worded it in there, and they were asking specifically to keep the current non-conforming configuration. And of course, you know that they did point out what the conforming configuration would be in terms of having 16 spaces.
Right.
So, I looked at the floor plan, and I would be hard pressed to try to find, at least in 4 of the units, which are pretty small, a way to accommodate 2 people in each unit. I mean, they're really small studio apartments. I think by right they're allowed to have 5. I don't think the density issue is a concern. I don't see 16 people going in there, but I also conversely could see 16 people in the current configuration.
Could see.
Could see, sure. Right now, I could see 16 people there, more so than I think I could see 16 people in 8 units. I don't know, I'd like to hear what the others have to say.
Yeah, I agree with Nick with regard to the density issue. I think that the only thing we heard tonight was that there was at one point where one of the apartments had 4 people in it under its current configuration. So I do think whatever density concerns exist today would exist in the future. And I'm eager, but I am eager to hear what others have to say with regard to the hardship. What I heard from the hardship is without undertaking this construction, it would fall outside of the parameters of long-term housing supports. And I get that and I understand it. I'm just trying to get my arms around whether or not that's a hardship.
Andrew.
Well, I'm doing my best to be as dispassionate as possible because it's obviously a very important issue. The applicant is an extremely honorable and incredible organization that has an incredible mission. I'm just having a really hard time with the hardship. I think that particularly with 4, which is having dwelling units of 320 square feet as opposed to 600 square feet. My personal opinion, which probably isn't relevant, but I'll just say it, is that on a citywide level, there should be some zones that have some allowance for smaller dwelling units, and it probably should be shared among all the zones on some equal level in some way that takes the entire community into account. I just have a hard time sort of with that being decided on the zoning board level, when we're really supposed to just be enforcing the code as it stands before us. And I think going down to almost half-size dwelling units where there's, you know, it's not allowed, whether you're gonna, I don't know if you're gonna have 16, 32 people or whatever that, you know, people are speculating. That is speculative, I don't know, but there's a reason why, you know, the code as it stands is at 600 feet. I just don't see anything. I see what Mr. Hastings points. I think he's doing the best he can, but I'm not seeing anything very unique about this lot or even this structure that, you know, would avoid the slippery slope problem. I just don't think it's that, you know, that unique. That would, you know, to justify this type of variance.
So I think this property is uniquely situated, uniquely laid out to accommodate this use, which of course is not the hardship standard. But you are permitted to look at the existing structure on the property when you're considering the uniqueness of the property. And this existing structure, you know, it's not a vacant piece of land where we're looking to build 8 small apartments. This is an existing structure that they're looking to convert into 8 smaller apartments. And it's an existing structure that could currently house 16 adults legally without building a single wall. Really, all they're doing is building internal walls and providing kitchens. I think that the conditions essentially exist now. They could, you know, put people in there with vouchers now and not change a single thing. They want to do it this way. This is a reasonable use. It is a permitted use, and multifamily housing is a permitted use. It will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. Multifamily is allowed. There's no loss to the public from granting it, while there is a significant loss to the applicant from denying it. I don't think it's going to diminish surrounding property values. I'm not concerned about precedent because, of course, each property is unique, and the easement is not our issue. So I think this is a great project, and I 100% support all 5 variances.
Can I go home now? It's a tough one. The points that Andrew raised occurred to me as well. That this appeal may be before the wrong group. If this is the standard for housing throughout the entire city, of certain minimum square footage of area, for us to selectively say, well, here, because of who wants to use it, it doesn't apply or shouldn't apply or should be get the benefit of a variance, strikes me as not necessarily an appropriate thing for a zoning board to be doing. On the other hand, everything that Laura said is indisputable in terms of the suitability of the building for what they want to use it for. Obviously, there's an extraordinary situation here in that they are committing to a 40-year tenure. We don't see very many appellants who could say that with a straight face, but they can, which means that although the variances would go with the land, they would also be accompanied with the same conditions of occupancy that they're proposing now, as opposed to someone else coming along somehow doing it differently and creating a problem. So I'm on the fence about it. I think what might knock me to one side is that it is unlikely that we can have some confidence that the occupancy conditions will obtain over a long period of time. And it is, I'm convinced, unlikely that the building would be any more heavily occupied than it is now, or could be now. So that combined with the fact that the location of the lot is not an inappropriate spot for a multifamily apartment or single occupancy apartment building. It's on a busy street. It's across from an institutional use. It's near other similar buildings, and it's not in the middle of a single-family housing development somewhere. So although it's not an easy decision for me. I think I would be inclined to support a motion to grant the variances for the reasons I just gave with the reservations that I gave, so. That's all I have to say. Now can I go home?
Not quite yet.
That's a hard one. It's a really
It is a hard one.
It's a really hard one.
There was a question that was asked while I was sitting down with regard to why I brought the driveway up.
Mr. Macris, we can't take any more testimony at this point. All right. Would anyone care to make a motion?
I will make a motion that we approve. Is everyone comfortable doing it as one motion for all 5 variances, or do you want me to do that?
I mean, I'd be inclined to split my vote, but I get the sense I'm gonna be in the minority, so if the point.
Well, if you would, then we should split it.
Yeah.
So which one would you like to take out?
Well, I'll just say I'm inclined to approve 2 and 5.
Want to talk about the others?
I'm inclined to deny the others, so that's the split I would.
Okay. Do I hear a motion on 2 and 5?
I make a motion that we approve variance number 2 to allow a residential conversion on a lot of not quite 25,000 square feet, and Article 5 to allow an existing non-conforming parking situation to continue for the reasons stated earlier, that all of the variance criteria are met.
And I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion? On the subject of the easement and the question about paving half the driveway and so forth, I believe Mr. Hastings is correct. That's really not
It's not our
our
purview.
concern. That's something they will have to work out, but it's not something that we have any control over. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The vote is unanimous. Articles 2 and 5, or items 2 and 5 are approved. That brings us back to the conversion to accommodate, a variance from the conversion to accommodate not more than 5 units.
I will make a motion to approve variance requests 1, 3, and 4, which are to allow 8 dwellings in 2 buildings where 5 would be permitted, and to allow the dwelling units to be smaller than 600 square feet. Again, for the reasons stated earlier, that I believe all the variance criteria are met.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. It's been moved.
Give me a second at least.
That was a tense moment. Okay,
But Jim's gonna
we have a second. This is for items 1, 3, and 4.
1, 3, and 4.
1, 3, and 4. Any discussion on the motion? I think we've said it all at this point. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Nay.
The vote is 4 to 1, with Mr. Winters in the minority. And that means all the variances are granted. That takes care of our agenda for this evening.
One more thing.
Yeah. I'm sorry, the Ferry Street one, I think you announced
Oh,
we were gonna
right,
take it up. We
right,
have to vote to
right.
push it off to the next
Glad you caught me out on that one.
That was Mr.
Actually, it was,
Walmart who caught that.
no, it's Ernest that
Ernie
caught
caught
it.
that one.
Ernie got it.
Do I hear a motion to continue the Ferry Street sign project until the April meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Move to approve last month's minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
And if Rose is fast enough, we can approve tonight's minutes tomorrow.
Yeah.
They're not gonna be done.
I wasn't here, so I did watch some of the video, but not all of it, so I'll abstain.
Okay.
So we'll,
Video,
one
wow.
abstention.
Yeah.
Do you get that, Rose?
The minutes were impeccable. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow.